Hey, Lau, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
How you feeling today?
I'm okay. I'm a little tired, but I'm okay in general. I'm always tired now. Modern life, right?
Being a mom, right?
Being a mom and being a lot of other things at the same time.
All right, well, good. So, folks, we have a real treat today. My ex-wife, Laura Alvarado, is going to be joining us on the show today. And she's gonna tell us her side of the story, what it was like when we first met, what happened, and what it's like now. That sound about right, Lau?
That sounds about right, although it's been a long time. And, I think time plays games with your memory sometimes, right? And I really truly believe that we should all probably write down everything that we experience in our lives because certainly with time, it kind of gets blurry and you kind of remember things the way you want to remember them or forget things you don't want to remember.
I think that's a good thing, though. I think that in many cases,
Self-defense mechanism, I guess.
it's a self defense mechanism, and also sometimes, the brain is very efficient. The brain is very efficient, and in many cases, it processes information for the greater good for humanity. Right? As a human being, the brain processes information in a certain way, and it protects us. Right?
Perhaps. But
And
at
there's
the same
certain
time, I
and if
think
I'm
it's good to remember some things that you defensively tend to forget.
well, there's going to be things that you're definitely not going to forget. Right? And even if
Okay.
it's foggy, even if it's foggy, if you want to recall it, you could do it real fast.
I suppose, but I think in relationships it works a lot like maybe like having kids, but for a woman from the woman's perspective, because when you give birth, it's a horrible. I mean, it's a painful and difficult experience. And somehow eventually you repress that and you decide, hey, I'm going to have another kid because at the end the experience of having the kid after the pain and after the difficulties you may have had during pregnancy or whatever, it makes it all worth it. So it's kind of the same with relationships. I think you kind of forget that pain, forget that the difficult experience, and you kind of eventually say, oh, I'm going to jump at it again. And sometimes it's not such a good idea.
All right, all right. Well, on that note, then tell us a little bit about what your normal daily routine looks like.
Um, Hectic. I'm sorry. Hold on. I usually get up every day at around 5:30 in the morning. That's usually the hour my day starts. And I get my kids ready for school. I get myself ready, breakfast, things ready around the house. Get the kids to school. Come back, arrange lunch. Sometimes I exercise a little bit in the morning, not every day in the morning. Sometimes I do it at night and get lunch ready and start working. That's basically it. If I have time, I do some reading. Well, I obviously squeeze some praying time in there, at least 20 minutes or so, and that's it. And then my day starts with a lot of work, a lot of distractions, and that's usually how it goes. I juggle different things because I have a pet store, so sometimes I go there. Sometimes I stay home and I do work on my on content. I do content writing for some pages, so that's how my day goes.
Okay, all right.
Run errands for the family, go pick up the kids, feed them, and it the day goes on
And repeat.
and repeat every single day.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the praying time, because that's one of the things that's super important for our listeners, and also for the people that are in recovery in general. There is that spiritual component that really allows us to connect on a different level, not just with the universe, but with ourselves. Right? There's this internal guidance system that we have, and when we connect that to our higher power, then that changes the dynamic of how we feel and the direction of our lives. So I was hoping you could expand a little bit on your spiritual condition and how you maintain that.
Well, I was raised a Catholic, and my family used to take me to church every single Sunday. But I'm not. As I grew older, I was, and I went actually to a Catholic high school as well. So I do have a religious basis, so to speak, but I don't. I'm not a big fan of the church system, or all that stuff. So but I am spiritual. I believe in God. I do follow the Catholic beliefs, and for not entirely, for the most part. And but mostly I believe in God. I believe there's a supreme force, power out there that guides us through a lot of things. I've seen him in action many times in my life, and I don't think, and like I said, I don't go to church every week, but every now and then I attend mass when I have the need to do it more than anything else. But I do pray on a daily basis, and I've taught my kids to pray on a daily basis as well, and to show gratitude first of all, for everything we do have and sometimes we take for granted on a daily basis. That includes health, work, and even bad experiences that we wish we didn't have to go through. And pray for enlightenment, because there's so many times in our lives that we just
Yes.
really, really, really need that. So especially it's natural, I think, for humans. We usually pray more when we're more in need of it, right? Than when things are going well. But I never stopped praying. I never stopped saying a prayer when in the morning and at night, and even through the day, even if it's something small and it's more like a conversation with my God than anything else. But I do believe in that. I believe in the positive energy. I believe in the protection of angels, and the protection of both people that are around you, and how the universe works in very mysterious ways. So I do believe in all that stuff.
That's
And it's
and
helped
I
me
think that's
tremendously through the years as well.
yes, and I think that that's so important because there's moments in our lives that are so painful, they're so difficult, and trying to communicate that to another person maybe, or trying to communicate that with somebody else, just the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings, everything that's going on internally in your body and in your mind, and to communicate that to another person sometimes is more daunting, more terrifying than anything else. And so to connect with a higher power
Yeah.
allows you to have that conversation, to journal, to write, to express yourself in that way. And if there's a true belief system, then you know that what you're saying and what you're writing is getting somewhere, because the
No, and
feelings and the emotions you get from that change, right? The dynamic of the situation.
no, and it helps you. I think when you ask, you have to ask God to interfere or to intervene in your life in some
Yeah.
way. You
Yep.
have to ask for help. If you want help, you have to ask for it. Because at the end of it all, humans, we have the free will,
Hmm.
and we have the right to choose whether we decide for something, for a higher power to help us or not, if we choose to do it on our own. And if we believe in a higher power, then at some point you just have to understand that you can only do so much, and then the rest, everything that seems impossible, or everything, the opportunities that seem that are never going to come or whatever, those are left in the hands of the universe, of a higher power, God, whatever you want to name it.
Yep. Absolutely. 100%. So we'll get more into that because when you're telling your story about, when we were married, there was a lot of God moments. So we'll go into that. And for those of you that are wondering, the pictures that you see with my wife, Marcella, and my daughter, Marissa, this is Marissa's mom. So,
Hi.
so,
That's my
what, huh?
That's why Marissa's pretty.
That's right. Thank God she got her mother's looks. So the time I do, there's a lot of social media out there that I have, and so my family is right on the forefront of all of that. You know what I mean? And this is the first opportunity that many of my listeners and followers get an opportunity to see someone who is just as important in my life. And Marissa is the glue that's kept us all together. We're still very good friends and family because of my daughter, and because of recovery. Because if I hadn't dove into recovery and made the choices that I made and listened to my sponsor the way that I did, we would not have the relationship that we do today. So I'm very grateful for the program, for my relationship with my higher power, because it's given us this opportunity to even be here on this call right now, to support each other. You know what I mean? Because even 14 years later, and shit, now we've known each other. Oh, Marty's 18 years.
Marissa's 15.
My daughter's 15. I knew that. That makes it 19 years. We've known each other. So that's so as we go into that journey, also Laura's not an alcoholic or a drug addict, right? But she has had experience with alcohol. And so I'm just gonna ask you the same question I ask all of my guests. How old were you the first time you drank or used drugs, and more importantly, how did they make you feel? And expand as much or as little as you like.
I was very young. I was probably 14, 13, 14, and my parents always had, they weren't there to the day. They've never been drinkers, but they always used to, for dinner or for a family gathering or stuff like that. They would have a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey, whatever. And I remember at some point, I was probably around 14. It was for New Year's Eve at my uncle's house, that they just gave me a glass of wine and said, "Hey, I want to have a glass of wine, try it out." And then my dad, every now and then, and I remember him doing the same with my brothers. He would always say, "I'd rather you try it at home and with us as a family than you doing it outside and trying it with your friends or somewhere else where I can't keep an eye on you." So that's the first time I drank, and I remember I liked it. I always liked the flavor of wine. I'm like to the day. I still like it, and I was I think I throughout, even though I had like a glass of wine back then, I was never inclined to drinking a lot of it or getting really wasted. I think I actually did obviously get wasted several times, like I think most young people do, after I turned 18. And I think mostly actually after I turned 21 or something like that I did get wasted several times. But it was mostly socially, like if we were out with friends or whatever, but it was never something like I needed or I had to or anything. I did try smoking weed a couple of times, that. And but at the same time, it was never. I've just never had that. I guess that in me to become an addict. I never really liked smoking cigarettes. I tried it once. I hated it, and even with weed and stuff like that. But I never really, even though I think it was fun for social events and stuff like that. It was never really something that I either craved or needed or anything like that. So yeah.
Okay. All
That's
right. Well, that's important to know too, right? I mean, we were together for 4 years, and I was the train wreck, right? And so we would party together, and hang out and do that thing, and then it was like I would always just keep it going, right? Like, when are you gonna shut it down? So there's that whole dichotomy between that the people that don't have the switch, that as soon as the the feeling comes in, as soon as the buzz comes in, the brain goes, okay, we're cool now. Let's enjoy this. And, you know, cool, we'll shut it down. And then there's those of us that the button gets clicked and it's like, oh my God, I think we need more and more and more and more.
Exactly. Yeah. No, luckily for me, I never had that situation, and no one in my family does either. So I don't know. There's anything to say for that, but
Thank
no. I
God.
even till today, I have a glass of wine. I have two if I go out with friends, and that's it. I don't do anything else. That's as much as I do a couple of beers every now and then, a couple of glasses of wine, whatever. That's it.
All right. All right. All right. So now it's time for me to turn the show over to you. It's time for you to share your story with us. In this case, it's
Okay.
not the battle with drugs and alcohol. It's more of, the story of, how we met and what happened and, just your side of the story, just to as a way to express yourself. All my listeners have heard my side of the story. And I think it's when you said, no, I'll tell my side of the story. I thought it was a very cool opportunity for my listeners to understand, both sides, because in many, 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 many relationships, there is the addict and there is the non-addict, and there is that relationship and the chaos and the tragic things that happen. So tell us your side of the story, Lau.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you mentioned it at some point about talking about this, I said, well, it has. Unfortunately, addiction has a lot of repercussions. Obviously, not just on the person that is suffering it, but in the people that are around him or her, and that's probably, um, in my case, you're the only person in my life that I've ever met or had a relationship with that actually had an addiction problem. Not that I knew it at the time,
Mhm.
obviously. I met Omar being very young. I was probably on my early, probably not. I was in my early 20s, and well, I think I was working, and Omar had just come. I was working in a sports book, and Omar had just come in from the United States, and that's when we met. That's how we met. I believe somebody at some point said something to me like, "Oh, he wants to ask you out or whatever," and I didn't show any interest at that point. At some point, you asked me out. I said to dinner, as far as I remember. I said okay, and I never really expected anything from it. Like I can't say, "Oh, it was love at first sight," because I can't say that. But we had a fun dinner, and things escalated from there. And Omar is very nice. He's very like he is today, very funny, of course. And in general, he treated me well. He was very attentive, very detailed. He was always, very nice about the way he he treated me and all that stuff. And it was fun. We had a good group of friends that we used to hang out with and go to dinner with, and I think things were going well at that time for both of us, even in work and things like that. So I think all that obviously helped in one way or another build the relationship. And soon enough, the relationship got more serious, and eventually we were living together. Um, I think when it comes to the addiction, initially it wasn't. I don't think it. I think it. I don't know at what point it started, and I honestly, to the day, I can't. And part of it may be memory, like I said earlier in the conversation. Um, memory fails me for my own good or whatever. And but I don't remember at what point it began. I remember as he proposed to me, and I'm sorry if it cut off over there. And after that point, after you proposed, I think it kind of I started seeing some more evident problems there. And why? Because some nights, he would come in extremely late or not come in at all. Um, lame excuses or just stinking like alcohol or stuff like that. And I think in many ways, me being so young and everything, I probably turned to, turned, how do you say it?
Turned a blind eye.
exactly, turned a blind eye on it, on certain situations. And because I was caught up in the romantic side of it all, I just kind of, ignored some things that could have been um, alarms, alerts about certain situations. Maybe, maybe obviously somebody older or somebody with more experience in terms of alcohol and drugs and stuff like that would have probably noticed it, or even not even that, just in life in general. Somebody with more experience in life in general would have probably noticed the evident symptoms of alarm. And but I didn't. I figured it was, just Omar being Omar or man being man, whatever. And him hanging out with friends and being in his social circle, that was very common. I think, the group of people that and that's very true. When you hang out with certain people, you end up kind of um, you know doing the same thing they do or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
And I think a lot of that was, I, I I made up that excuse and I justified it, a lot of the behaviors, because of that. I remember um, that we had a lot of fights, prior to getting married, but at no point did I made the decision of, or reconsidered marrying you. And obviously I should have, and not in retrospective. No, no, I'm seeing. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I don't regret everything that happened, because obviously it had to happen, and that's why I have my daughter and everything. But I'm just saying, based on everything that was going on, I probably should have, you know. And but I didn't, and things. We got married, and it was a beautiful ceremony actually, and everything. But and then we had a great experience with the honeymoon trip and everything. It was good. And eventually, I think once we got back, it kind of got worse. I think, or it was already at that point. I don't know. I remember one day you didn't. I remember that clearly. I remember that you didn't show up, and I was really worried because you didn't show up uh, at to sleep, and you weren't answering your phone, and it was nowhere to be found. And I don't remember exactly how it went down in terms of how I ended up locating you. I think I ended up going calling one of your friends in Escazú. I think it was, I don't know if it was Ray or who it was. And he said,
Oh
"Oh yeah, he was
shit. Yeah.
around here or whatever." Yeah, and I mean, Omar had just gone on a you know
Bender.
bender. Yeah, and I think you spent the night like sleeping on a bench in a park or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was obviously one huge, you know, alert about how bad things were for him. And obviously, the feeling that you have at that point is just a, um, how would you say it? You just don't know, really don't know, because you've never experienced anything like that in your life. So you don't know how to react to it. You don't know how to help. And so, you know, the natural response is obviously being upset or getting mad, and at the same time being concerned. But yeah, it was horrible. I also remember at some point, I mean, he you disappeared for a few days and you came back, and that's when you actually came clean about about a lot of things. And he came clean about a lot of things, but this was actually after we already knew that you had a problem. You already knew that you had situations you were trying to get help, uh, but not very efficiently, or were trying to leave it on your own, on your own, and you weren't accomplishing much. And you lied, about things, about you were where you were going, about who you were with, about things like that. Anyway, there's a few things that I remember. Obviously, there were a lot of different situations that just kept, happening. You lied about where you were, who you were with, showed up late at night, stank like, drugs and alcohol cocktail. And but I guess it was, there's a few things, like I remember that time that I was freaked out about you not showing up, and there was another time you just disappeared for like a weekend or whatever, and then just reappeared. And I don't know what you were on, but you were rambling about different, whatever experience you've had and whatever. And in your fantasy, and well, not fantasy, but it was reality, but at the same time, in that state of mind, better said, you came clean about a lot of different things, and all the times you cheated on me, and all the different, things that you'd done, didn't do, whatever. And that's after that situation, that's when we had a conversation, and we sat down, and you eventually made the decision of getting you help, and you went to that rehab center in Erelia, whatever. I think by that time I was already pregnant, if I'm not mistaken. And um and um well, it was kind of the opportunity we were giving, obviously to help you get clean and to also help the relationship. But at that point, there had already been a lot of damage done, because obviously there was, no trust, no respect in a lot of different ways. And um and and even though there was a justification, that was the use of drugs, that didn't really, you know make me feel any better, so to speak. Anyway, when I remember also the whole experience about the people you used to work with, or friends that we had in common. Obviously, when these sort of things happen, people start telling you, and opening more and giving you information, some of it true, some of it not true. You can't really tell, but eventually you just start feeling like a fool, I suppose, because there were so many different things that you chose not to see, or that you just didn't see at all, and you start feeling really, really like a fool, stupid in many different ways, because a lot of people knew what you were doing, and knew how you were living this double life, so to speak. And so you start, wondering, I mean, you know what did I do wrong? How could I have been so stupid? Whatever, all these different things. um in other words, the the experience was very difficult, very hard. And I was pregnant at the time, so I was not just dealing with the fact that you were, an addict, and trying to understand what that meant as well, but also trying to deal with my own situation. I was working, which helped. Work helped, because obviously it keeps you busy, and it keeps you doing something else. And but it was really, really a difficult time in my life, because I felt very lonely. Thank God I've always had like my family and everybody there. Because I remember one time, even the house where we lived in, it was raining, and it flooded and everything, and there was water everywhere. And I remember, I don't know, I don't remember how far along in my pregnancy I was, but I remember I had to, deal with all that on my own. We had a lot of dogs as well at the time, so it's like everything together. And it was really hard. Eventually, I think, at that point, I'd still kind of wanted things to work out and everything. When I was at work one time, and then I received a phone call from the rehab center you were in. You had been there, what, for a week or so? I don't remember. Or 2 weeks, I don't know. And I think it must have been like 2 weeks. And they told me,
Two
hey,
weeks.
Omar, yeah, Omar left the 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 center or whatever, and we don't know where he's at, and he didn't say anything, and there was no stopping him, whatever. And I was like, what the hell, right? And you were nowhere to be found. He just simply disappeared. And that was fun. And right, I mean, what the heck. And I remember calling your sister at some point and asking her if she'd seen you or whatever. She's like, no. And at some point, I guess through the following day or whatever, I don't even remember. I swear to God, like I said, it's all blurry for me now. I
I
don't
called
even
you.
know exactly. I think you called me. You told
Mm.
me you had left through the Panama frontier because you were in some paranoid event or whatever, and you were heading to the States. So eventually your sister called me and she told me, hey, he's with me or whatever. And so at least I knew where you were. But it was again, it was a sense of abandonment in many ways. And it was just, I guess at that point, you wonder, because obviously I'm not an addict. I've never had an addiction, so you don't know at what point um you have to justify certain things because of the addiction, obviously. But it's a justification for you, but it's not a justification for the people you hurt, right? And as much as you want to understand it, and as much as you want to let's I guess it's like anything else, you end up hurting the people around you. And even though you're not conscious and you're not doing it on purpose, um it still happens. You still do it, and you're still responsible for that. And as much as I was responsible for whatever I did with my life at that point. So my priority at that point in my life was obviously my daughter. And so I just kept on working, and got through my pregnancy. I had friends, I had family, so that made things easier in a way. At some point, you started getting your life back together while you were in the States, and that was good. You obviously you could I could hear you on the phone being better, but it was, hey, good for you. But at the same time, you know, um, I'm here dealing with what I have to deal with by myself in an experience that's supposed to be happy, in a situation that it's supposed to be fun, and yeah, fun and happy and all that stuff. It just there was a lot of resentment in a lot of different things. Like I said, luckily I had a steady job. I had a good income, so I didn't have to depend on you at that time. So, and that was, I think, you know awesome, because if I would have had to depend on you, I don't know what I would have done, because that would have been just adding to my tension at that time. And but at that moment, I had support from family and friends. And even though there were a lot of things at that point that you can't share with them, obviously, like my family and my friends, they knew, well, my friends probably knew, my closer friends knew more about what was going on than my family. And I didn't go into a lot of details with them, because I didn't want for them to end up uh, having negative feelings towards you, even though they they knew you had just left while I was pregnant. That didn't help, right? but at least, I tried to not go into details about how bad things were, and what you had put me through at that point, because I didn't see the necessity of it. I didn't want. I knew you were, you're the father of my daughter. I knew I was going to have you in my life, um, for the rest of my life, uh, and I didn't want that issue. So I think I think that was it. I think I had a lot of down moments when obviously I would break down under certain circumstances. But but also being pregnant, even though it made me more vulnerable, at the same time it gave me the strength to just move forward and keep going, right? um and eventually when you came back, I think so many things had already changed. um of course, it's always the same story, right? You promised you'd changed and whatever, but I was I had already had to go through all that by myself. So you come to a point where you're like, okay, you've put me through all this, and you just, you know, and I've gone through it and come out. Sorry, there's a bee in here, and and I've come, yeah, and I managed to get through it, and I'm finally, and I was probably at that point in a emotionally somewhat stable situation. At least I wasn't going crazy like I was at the beginning. And and I was like, I I didn't know what I really want out of our relationship. I didn't know what I wanted because obviously I wanted to have. We'd been married months,
Yeah,
not even a year,
not even a year.
and not even a year, and I obviously wanted the relationship to work, and I didn't want to, because you feel all that stuff, you feel as a failure in your part. I mean, in my part, in other words, and you feel like a failure. You're like, okay, you're gonna be married and you're gonna get divorced in less than a year. uh you know and am I gonna just how's my life going to be from this point on, raising a kid on my own, and all that stuff comes to your mind. And I guess um you had all those things, but at the same time you had the, how do I get past everything that went through? How do I get past the fact that he cheated on me, that he lied to me? Do I trust him? Do I not trust him? um, all these things. Of course, there's still, feelings, and there's still a love in between, because you just don't go from loving somebody today to just, not loving them tomorrow. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So of course there's a lot of feelings still in there, and a lot of things that you wonder. As a woman, obviously you always wonder, okay, what's more convenient? Should it stay? Should it go? What do I do? um, like I said, luckily for me at that time, because for a lot of women, I know it becomes an issue. The financial part wasn't an issue for me at that time. I was in a very stable condition, so that wasn't a problem. So for me, it was more about the emotional, you know, situation, and how I wanted to go through with everything, how I wanted to raise my daughter, and the example I wanted to give my daughter at the same time. So there's so many different things and factors that you have to take into consideration. And um, at some point, I know I think I was sitting in front of because you asked me, and you said you were going to ask me like one of those moments when or you have more clarity on what you're going to do. I was I was shopping. I was after work. I stopped at the Price Mart by the house, and this song came in the radio, and it made just a click. It was like, and I started crying, and I wasn't even able to do the shopping. I just sat there and cried. And I remember at some point I said, "It's just I just can't do this. I simply can't do this. I don't I don't I can't. There's certain things I can't forgive, because in particular you feel that, or at that point I felt like I had given um, a lot into the relationship, and I had also taken a lot into the relationship. And you also wonder at some point, you're like, okay, you've come this far, and you're just going to turn back at this point, and just, why don't you just do, go, keep going until, to see what happens. But something at that moment just kind of clicked, and I went home, and I said to myself, I don't think I could do this. And Christmas was coming, and we moved out of that house, and we moved into a different house or whatever. And then when Marissa was born, and there was just so much more, still going. And I don't know. I don't know at what point, if you were really clean at that time, if you weren't. I think there was something inside of me that didn't believe that you were completely clean.
Yeah, I
Even
wonder why
though,
that would be.
exactly right. No, no, even though we weren't even living together then, you know, but there was something, that alerted me. Obviously, I had already gone through the experience with you, that I didn't have prior. And something, even though I wasn't there to see you, whether you were to see any signals, so to speak. There were certain things that probably, you know, raised the flags for me. And at some point, I said, okay, well, I also, I remember my mom asking me, and Marissa had just been born, and my mom asking me and saying, "Hey, but what are you gonna do?" And whatever. My mom's always been like, "Oh, you have to, I understand, so you want to give it a shot and not get, don't be impulsive about this or whatever." And I said to my mom, I was like, "Mom, it's not impulsive. I mean, obviously I can't tell you why, and I can't go into details with you on 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 what's going on, what has gone down in the past months. But the bottom line is, I just can't trust him. I can't see myself being with him and him going out and, doing whatever at whatever time of day, and trusting that he's telling me the truth about where he's going or where he's at or who he's with or what he's been doing. I just can't trust him. And I can't leave with that hanging over my head all the time, because I need to know, I like stability and peace in my mind. I've always liked stability in my life. And, not having that in, like, what am I going to do? Be chasing him around all the time? You know, I'm going to make his life miserable. I'm going to make my life miserable because I'm not going to be at peace at any given point. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't do it. So I think those were like two moments where I was really aware that it was probably never going to work again between us, or it was going to be extremely, or a lot of time, or something, very, the universe had to work in a very weird way for things to get back in track, because I knew something was broken that was
Yeah.
just beyond repair. And that was that. And I had, at that point, there was somebody in my life as well that was giving me a lot of support, and that was Mario. And that was giving me a lot of support as a friend and everything. But he was obviously, he had other interests as well with me. But he was very supportive as a friend, and he was always there for me. And I think that also gave me, enlightened me in one way or another, to understand that my life was not just, you know over, that it wasn't, that I was not necessarily, that this was not necessarily a failure, and that I could move forward and look forward to other things in my life. So that you know that was that. Eventually, once Marissa was like a year old, I moved out of where we were over to where I live now, with the help of my parents, and closer to my family, which helped a lot with Marissa still being, so young and everything. And that was that. I mean, I know, Omar tried for a long time, for us to get back together and stuff, but it was just not there. It was just not happening. I mean, I had a great, you know, uh, I still love you as a friend and as the father of my son, of my daughter, but it was just not, you know, not in a romantic way anymore. It was just not there because there's so many other elements lacking to be able to have a healthy relationship. But that was that. Um, and then fast forward um, 14 years, because Marissa was one by the time I moved to this house. So yes, fast forward 14 years. It's been, it was fun. I mean I re I restarted my life, so to speak. Um, Eventually, Mario and I began a romantic relationship, and it was great. Um, Marissa was almost 5 years old when yeah, she was almost 5. She was 4.5, or almost 5 when my son was born, when Emiliano was born, and I think we've had, you know, a great relationship. Well, I had a great experience. I can't complain. I've always had ups and downs, especially, you know, work wise or financial. There's always something you have to deal with. And but my relationship with you, I think, went from, you know, eventually mutated into a friendship, into a good friendship. And because I never, despite what many people always, you know, used to tell me, you know, like, you get him to pay alimony or whatever. It's like, you know, I was never that kind of person. Like I said, it was, for me, it was, and I think at some point I told you, I said, look, you're going to be as involved in Marissa's life as you want to be, and you're going to be the kind of parent or the kind of father you want to be to Marissa. Um, it was nothing, you know, I never wanted my daughter to kind of um, say to me at any given point, hey, you didn't allow me to have a good relationship with my father. I said, you know what, they're going to build a relationship they're meant to build, and that he's willing to build with her, as much time as you wanted to dedicate to her, as much time, and, you know, as much bonding as you guys wanted to do. And I think that part worked out well. Omar has always gotten along well with my family. um, Ever since he got really sober, you know, things got much better in terms of how we communicated and how things were going. For a long time, obviously there were resentments and things, I think, between us, but, you know, time heals all wounds. And I think, you know, throughout the years we've come to that point where we share a wonderful daughter. And he knows I love his sister, and his nieces, and even his mother I have a good relationship with, even though I don't see her much. And you have a good relationship with my family, and I think they've come to love you as well. And that's that. I think for the most part, Marissa has been. It was probably a good decision because Marissa was never didn't have to go through um, a huge separation or fights or anything like that as a baby. She never had to see anything like that. Like, she was brought up in a very healthy environment, and she got used as a little kid that you and I were not together. So I don't think it was ever weird for her, because that's actually the normal standard for her. So so I think that was good. And what else? And I'm just glad. I'm glad to see that, you know, in that in your particular case, you know, you were able to get clean, and you've been clean for so many years. And that's also a testimony that you can give to your daughter, and that today, well, has us here talking and chatting about this. Mm, after earlier this year, I separated from my second partner, because we never got married, but from my second partner, or, but I consider him my husband after so many years together. And it's been hard, um, but here we are, battling the good battle as usual. And I think probably the hardest part is having to relieve many feelings. Um, like I said, obviously, I can't say that I regret anything that I've gone through. I have a wonderful daughter, a wonderful son, and biggest motivation ever. Um, but uh, but yeah, I guess you come to a point. I'm 38 years old, almost 39, um, and you get to a point where you're like, okay, what have I accomplished? My situation today is very different from what it was 16 years ago, or and financially speaking, it's tougher. Um, so it you get to that point in your life when you don't really know. You find yourself in certain situations where you don't know, how you got there, and you have to start there by figuring out what got you to that point. And again, seek the assistance of a higher power, and kind of take it from there. And that's where I'm at today. I'm kind of just hoping that soon enough things will turn around for the best, um, both in a financial and also emotional um, level.
You know, it is. It's interesting to have this interview because you wonder how many couples are able to have this conversation, and I've shared my story I don't know how many times. Obviously you're a big part of that, and Marissa's a big part of that, you know um and then as the chapter closes, right, and there's so many things that happen, like even in the movies, right? The movies has either some sort of a happy ending of some sort, right? Where things just happen to work out. But then what happens a few years down the road? Because I know that the cool thing was that, as far as stepdads go, I was always grateful that Mario was Marissa's stepdad, because I always got along with him. He's a good man, and he always treated you and Marissa with the same amount of love that I would have. I know it even more so, because he had the ability at the time to do so. I didn't have the ability to do that at the time, and I respected Mario a lot for stepping up and being there for you where I couldn't, and it was cool because, when I got married 4 years ago, our relationship allowed it so that you and Mario and Emiliano and Marissa could be there, that Marissa could walk me down the aisle and we could share this experience, together as a family. We spend Christmases together as a family. I go to Marcella and I, we go to your parents' house for Christmas, and that's part of our ritual. Every year we don't really have Christmas plans because we already know where we're going to go for Christmas. So life ebb and flows. You never know what's coming next, right? We can hope, and we can work very, very hard to try and do the best that we can for ourselves and for our children and for our family. But we never know what curveball is going to get thrown at you at any given moment. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
as far as like where you're at today, and as far as the way that I like to close the show, is asking questions basically that can help the listeners moving forward. And so most of the time when I close the show, it's about, tell me about what it was like in the first part of your recovery, right? And so in this particular case, it's more about, when did what sort of aha moments and what kind of um I guess the spiritual awakenings, like you mentioned about being in the car and listening to a song, you know what I mean? And then just kind of getting to that point where you realize that, I can't do this anymore. What is one of the biggest aha moments that you've had recently in your life that are reminiscent to that right now moving forward?
I think I'm waiting for a big aha moment. No, seriously, I am. I think I am. But I think it's eventually when it happens, but for a minute, throughout this whole, it's been 3 months since I've been separated, and I think, you know like I said before, you just kind of have to make a stop in your life and wonder what you've done wrong, because obviously there's always stuff that we always, I believe most humans, we try to do the best we can, right? I mean, we don't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna go, you know uh, hurt someone, or 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 I'm gonna do this so that my marriage fails in 2 months or whatever. No, but you do things and you're not conscious about what you do, that you could have done differently. And you just kind of, I guess, one of the aha moments recently has been like, well, I have to get my life back together somehow, and without, for me, not for anyone else, because as a mother, eventually you kind of get lost into in as a mother, as a wife, you get lost in different roles. Your life and your everyday things kind of um, are all about what your kids need and what your husband needs, and uh, what your family needs, what your work requires from you, and what you need financially, and it becomes more about what you know uh, the requirements of everybody else and everything else around you, and not really about you. So um you eventually have to, I used to always think, well, my kids are going to grow older, they're going to eventually go to college or start working and whatever, and they're going to eventually build their own lives and do with their own things, and even they're going to stop needing me as much as they need me today. They're going to want to be having their own life, be independent, and do what they do. And so I used to dedicate a lot of my time to my relationship, precisely because I figured, this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. So that's where you go, right? I mean, again, you go into somebody else, or you only think about your life in function of your marriage, or your being a mom, or whatever it is. And eventually you have to come to a point where you say, okay, now that's not the plan anymore. Readjust. So you have to reinvent yourself and figure out what you want, because I've always, and I think I've told you this at some point, I've always been very clear about what I wanted in my life. I knew I wanted to be a mother, a young mother, and I didn't want to, I wanted 2 or 3 kids, but by the time, I didn't want to be in at this stage in my life and having babies. I didn't never wanted to do that ever. I said to myself, I want to have my kids when I'm young, because that way, once I get to a certain age, I'll be able to travel and do my own thing and not worry about them. Well, obviously I'm going to worry about my kids, but not worry about having, to change diapers and get up at night, and, and all that stuff. I just didn't want to have to do that. And well, you happen to think you have a plan, but then I guess life has a different plan for you. It throws a curveball, like you said, and you have to reinvent yourself. You have to start thinking in function of you. What do you want? How do you want to live the rest of your life? What steps do you need to take to actually get to that point where you need to be in life, both in an emotionally stable and financial, and everything, you know. So readjust in pieces. Like I said, I don't think I've had um, an aha moment, so to speak, as of yet. Like that I can actually say, oh, this is why this happened, because or no. I don't think I've come to this point yet. Uh, I hope it happens. At some point, it will. But for right now, it's only been little things like, okay, you need to reevaluate what you've done wrong and kind of figure out how to be a better person and reestablish your plan. And um, and that's it, right? I mean, it's been, like I said, it's not the same to face this situation now that than 16 years ago, because the circumstances are very different. Like I said, when I separated from you, or we had been married for less than a year, and we had been in a relationship, for a couple of years before that. But in this situation I'm in now, I've been in a relationship for 13 years or so with this person, and obviously, and shared a family life together. So it's a very different experience. It's a very different situation, so to speak, because there's a lot more connections. There's a lot more things that connect us, and it's harder. I think it's hard. Um, I'm clear that even though, like I like if you ask me now, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't have a particular plan. Like I said, I wake up every day. I pray to God to guide me through the right steps and through the right path, and enlighten me in everything I'm going to do and everything I'm going to take on, and hope for the best, because and hope that he really has a good plan, because I really don't have any at this point. So no, seriously, you kind of just I'm going at it like you guys, in recovery say, one day at a time, kind of thing. And I think um, forgiving yourself is a very important part of the of the situation. Like being able to forgive yourself, being able to reevaluate what you did wrong and what you could have done better. And like I said, many different feelings. You feel frustrated. You feel like a failure in many ways. You feel like you're failing your kids. That's the worst feeling ever, ever. Um, Sorry, edit that.
No.
And that's probably the worst feeling ever. Like, because you're not responsible only for your situation, you're responsible for your kids' situation. So yeah, I think that's probably the hardest.
Have you ever failed your kids, Lau?
Well, like I said, not directly, but in a way or another, when your marriage fails and you no longer are able to give them that stability as a family unit, so to speak, then you feel like you failed, you know, because they were happy. They were happy in a stable home, in a stable um, unit, and all of a sudden, all that is destroyed for them. So of course you feel responsible. Maybe, obviously, you don't do it on purpose. Obviously, you don't do it with, like I said, like with the addiction. You don't do it with the intention or the objective of actually hurting somebody else. But on but in a divorce, the kids always pay the highest price. You know, they
Well,
do, because whatever you put them through today, it's gonna affect them for the rest of their lives. So yeah, you do, even if technically, Omar, you don't feel like you failed them, or you you don't technically have failed them, you feel like you have failed them. So yeah, you not only failed yourself, you failed your kids, and that's probably the hardest part of this situation.
well, I think that this is never easy. It wasn't easy. It wasn't
No,
easy 16 years ago. It wasn't easy. I'm going to be 15 years. yeah, so it wasn't easy 15, 16 years ago to go through what you went through. It's not easy what you're going through now. But, one of the things that I keep hearing you is that evaluate what I did wrong, evaluate what I did wrong. And I would reframe that and I would say, how about I focus on what I did right? Because you did a
Absolutely.
lot of right
And
things.
what you do right is but you know what you did right, and that's what allows you to value yourself and to know your worth. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if you can't, I don't think you can learn from if you don't realize what you've done wrong and where you've gone wrong, you know and not necessarily in what you've put into the relationship. Sometimes it's about what you have failed to do for yourself, for example. So there's many different things that you have to go back and consider and say, okay, this is what I should have done that I didn't do, and this is what I need to fix going forward. Because if you don't do that exercise, if you don't go through that, then how do you grow? How do you move forward and become a better person, right? So yes, there's always areas that you need to work on. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I know I did right, and then there's a lot of things that you have strengths. But they say, right, I mean, you have to know your weaknesses just as much as you have to know your strengths to be able to avoid people from using those weaknesses against you. So it's the only way to do it. It's the only way to handle things. And yeah, it's been hard, it's been difficult. I don't, like I said, I'm still kind of going through it one day at a time, trying to figure out where I want to go from here, and where I need to go from here, and where life is taking me now. Because obviously the plan I had is no longer, like I said, possible. So it's just going to have to be reevaluated. And um and that's where you're at. Like I said, you obviously you wonder, you know um what's life going to bring. A friend of mine asked me the other day, I'm like, oh, would you, there'll be somebody else will come to your life or whatever. And I'm like, you're not even thinking about that. Obviously, at this point in my life, I'm not thinking about that at all. And um and I don't think I want to even go there at any point, in the near future. You can't say never, like I say, never say never, because you don't know what life is going to bring. But for right now, it's about me, it's about the kids, and that's that.
So, what are some of the resources that you have used, or some of the resources at your books, or any other resources that you've used, or that you would suggest uh, to our listeners?
Okay, I read a lot. I've talked a lot to my friends, Omar being one of them. And I recommend talking to Omar. No, but no, all seriousness. No, honestly, yeah, talking to close friends has helped a lot. But you kind of, at I read a lot, and I've gone through a lot of reading about, relationships and all that stuff. But I've never been a big fan of getting self-help books or anything like that. I read, and I just kind of I've tried to understand my situation. I've tried to understand, like I said, why I'm in the current situation I'm at. So I've looked for help online, try to find resources, and trying to get through this stage, and how the divorce affects my kids and all these things. Um, but for the most part, I learned to live the process, like I said, little by little, because people will always tell you the same things. Oh, better things will come. God has a better plan. This and that and the other thing. But there's really nothing, when you're going through something like this. There's really nothing anybody can actually say that it's going to make you feel automatically better. It's obviously just a process. There's there's I don't I read, like I said, I read, but I don't usually do help books or anything like that. I like reading novels and reading other things that kind of keep me distracted, and all that stuff. There's a particular uh sort of like a gathering of thoughts that by an Argentinian singer and songwriter named Facundo Cabral, and it's called "You Are Not Depressed, You're Distracted." No,
I like
that's
it.
yeah. If you search it online and you find it, it's a good read. It's sort of like a gathering of thoughts, like I said. A lot of them probably you've heard some other people or some other motivators use them, but it's in Spanish, obviously, but they have the version in English. It's been around for a while, so they do have the version in English, and it's called that. You're not depressed, you're distracted. And it basically speaks of how so many times you get caught up in your own problems and you don't see all the good things that are around you.
Hmm.
So yeah.
That's a great resource. So I'm sure over the course of even back 16 years ago and even recently, right? You have people that are in your life that are close to you. What are some of the best suggestions you have ever received?
um wow. Let's see. I've received so many, but like I said, and a lot of them are really great, are really good, but none of them I think has have stopped me from feeling um what I felt. It's just given me support. It's just kind of helped me get through the situation, but it's never something. There's no magical potion in any of this, right? Nobody can actually say something that will snap you through out of it, or I don't, at least it hasn't been that way. But it's just the support of friends, the fact that people have been there um, for me through this situation. And I don't think anybody has said anything to me that has been life changing. It's always been, just you have to you have to keep moving forward, and you have to do whatever you need to do to to pull yourself back together. You're not allowed right now to stay in bed and cry and not do anything. You just have to keep on moving. But no, nothing in particular that anybody has said has actually made a big difference in the way I feel, because obviously people are right. At this stage in your life, I'm almost 40 years old. I mean, you already know this. You already know that life goes on. You already know that you're not going to die because your relationship came to an end. You already know that probably something good will be right around the corner. You know, you already know all these things, but you can't stop feeling the way you feel. So all you can do, like I said, is just take it one day at a time and just go at it. That's all I can say.
What about how can you speak to the idea of self-care and loving yourself?
Like I said before, I think you have to learn to accept yourself with your good things and your positive things and your strengths, and more so with your weaknesses. You have to learn what you're not good at, and where you fail miserably at, and your character defects and all those things. And you just kind of have to work on those, and accept yourself as you are, but at the same time work on whatever you can to improve yourself and make you a better person. But I think if if there's one thing that helps a lot, like when you're feeling down, and when you're feeling like you're just having a bad day altogether, is helping somebody else. When you help somebody else, and you do something nice for somebody else, or whatever that is, whether it is somebody close to you that needs help with something, and you just do it for that person. And if you're inclined to do involuntary work or whatever you want to do, when you are too caught up on yourself and you feel down and you feel that things are not going well for you, I think the best thing you can do other than crying over the spilled soup and feeling miserable is helping someone else. When you help someone else, it just kind of puts things into perspective, and it helps you move forward.
So, um, let's pretend that you knew someone, right? And they were telling you a story. They were telling you a story that is very reminiscent to what was happening uh, to us back then, right? So now uh, it's a friend, someone that you know, someone you care about. Husband's an addict, right? Uh, not coming home, cheating, right? Suspecting, just train wreck, right? She's right in the middle of the cyclone. What kind of suggestions? What would you tell her? You know, what would you offer her?
Uh, First, I'd say be careful with what you tolerate, because no, seriously, because what you when you accept certain things or certain behaviors or certain situations, you are letting people know how how you expect to be treated. And if you accept certain things, if you accept that your husband doesn't show up and sleep, to sleep, or if you accept that, he comes back smelling like liquor, or doesn't want to give you an explanation of where he's been, or who he's been with, or you know any kind of disrespectful situation like this, I'd say, if you allow those things, you're giving them permission to do it again, and they'll do it again, and they'll continue to do it. And at some point in your life, you have to figure out that if they really do love you, and if they really do care, they'll have they're the ones that have to take the initiative to show you that they care. I think for women, well, not necessarily for women. I think many men go through it as well. When you love somebody, you kind of want to always be there for them, and you'll sometimes tolerate things, and like I said before, be in denial about certain situations or certain behaviors or things. Um, that maybe even at one point in your life you said to yourself, "Oh, I would never accept that," and then you find yourself dealing with things like that and accepting it. And um, and and that's the thing. I think in the way to get to know yourself, you have to, because it's very difficult to know yourself and love yourself for everything you are. But in that route to do it, I think you have to first know what you're not, and what you're not willing to compromise on. If you're not the kind of person that will tolerate your husband, not coming to sleep unless you have, an open relationship, or you do your own thing. I mean, right? I mean, that everybody has different situations, but you have to draw the line somewhere, and you have to draw the line to where people won't take you for granted, and won't step over you, and won't, and you have to put yourself first, even as much as that hurts, and even if that means telling someone to take a hike, because at the end, if they do care and if they do love you, they'll have to show it somehow.
So as we close up the interview, right, and we not we as you think about what it is that the message that you want to bring to the listeners, right? Like we talked, I don't know if it was a few months ago, and I never even asked you if you wanted to be on the show, because you're I know how private you are about your life. I mean,
Yeah.
Lauda is one of those people that is very, very, very private. So I knew something must have triggered you, right? Like there's just sometimes you get to this point where it's like, fuck it, you know what I mean? Like I want to speak, because I'm tired of not speaking, or I'm tired of acting a way that people think I should act, or I'm just ready to say something, So when we were talking and you're like, I'll get on your show, and I was like, what? I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's do this, What is the message you want to give to our listeners?
No, I think that first of all, as a woman, like I said, and I have to say that I've always, both in my relationship with you and in my recent relationship, and in most of the relationships I've had, I've always tried to give the best of me. Um, Granted, there's always, nobody's perfect. There's a lot of things to fix, but I've always tried to give it my best, and I think that you that at some point, like I said, you start tolerating certain behaviors and you start, you know, accepting certain things because you want to make the relationship work. And and that's precisely, I think, the first mistake and the first step towards failure in a relationship, because you should never, like I said prior, you should never accept anything less than when you deserve. And if you uh, put X amount of work into a relationship, you should be getting back that that same respect, that same attention, love, time, whatever it may be. But yeah, I think for a lot of people out there, that sometimes we, because because you're used to being with somebody, or because you really love them and care for them and you want them to, you know, and you want the relationship to work out and you don't want to feel like a failure and all that, but you should never stay, you know, you should never compromise your values and compromise your the love for yourself, and allow anybody to step all over you.
Yes, I Rumi, for the love,
And
man.
because at the end you can't, you know, you can only do so much on your own, and the rest of, you know, your partner or your, you know, the other 50% is up to them, and they have to fix their own problems and really be clear about them wanting to be with you. And you can't, you know, you can't force that on anybody. So you can't force them to get help. You can't, if they're in an addiction, for example, you can't force them to love you. You can't force them to do anything. So you can only do what you do for yourself and love yourself and put and be clear about your limits.
And I think that's a perfect way to close. And I think that too many people do not have that clarity. They do not have that focus and that clarity about, number one, what their worth is. You know, what is my value, right? And so when I'm not clear about my value, then I put all of that energy into my relationship, maybe even into my children. I put everything that I've got, you know, and I can attest to that. You know, Lauda tried everything to help me get clean. We went to a psychologist, you know, we special herbs, right? We tried switching drugs, you know, and it's like, let's just smoke weed, you know what I mean? Or just stop doing the coke, right? It was just all this different, like, it was all about me, and it was all about me. And it was like, what about you? What about Lauda? You know, giving 100% into the relationship, right? And losing yourself in the process is something that everyone should be listening very intently to, because when you lose yourself, then you also lose your ability to protect yourself, defend yourself, take care of yourself, love yourself, right? You're so worried about what that person's doing and how to make things work that you sacrifice the energy that you vitally need for yourself. So I think that knowing what you're worth, knowing what your value is, knowing what you bring to the relationship, and expecting that the other person's going to bring the same. And I don't see anything that's actually the most healthy way to look at of going into a relationship. It's like a business, you know. This is what I bring to the table, this is what they bring to the table. Great, let's do this,
No,
right?
and like I said, you have to, I think you have, it is very important because sometimes we don't know, we don't have clarity on who we are because we grow all the time and we change all the time. And, you know, life changes us and circumstances change. But at the end, there's one thing that doesn't change is who you're not. And that's the first thing you should know is who you are not. I'm not the person that is gonna, you know, stand to be disrespected. I'm not the person that, um, I don't know, you know, that's gonna be out drinking and partying, and I'm not going to tolerate that somebody does this. You know, different things. Usually, we're not necessarily clear about who we are, but we are very clear about who we're not, and that's a very good way to start. Um, Setting up your limits and setting and drawing the line, because if your partner knows well what you're not willing to take and what you're not willing to accept, then that helps a lot, I think.
Knowing who you're not and knowing what not to tolerate. I think
Exactly.
that's powerful, and that's what everyone needs to know. And you know, I know this, Lau, that nothing that you've done, as far as I'm concerned, is a failure, right? Like if I were to look at my life and analyze and just start taking inventory of all the failures, my God, I would have jumped off a bridge years ago. Everything that I did for so many years was just a constant failure, right? I failed my marriage. I failed as a father. I failed as a human being. I failed with my partners. I failed in my business. I failed. You know, and when I realized that I'd made some bad choices and that I had gotten consumed in something that I could no longer, you know, get free from, and then found my way to it, right? The whole idea was to, you said it here yourself, you know, forgive yourself, you know, find the way to forgive yourself and go, okay, so what did I do right? What did I do back then? And now what's my next move moving forward? Because life is all about, I would say, making mistakes, and I would say even failures, right? Like all the failures that, I mean, me failing in our marriage allowed me to be the husband that I am to Marcella today, right? Like I don't do any of the shit that I put you through, you know what I mean? And that doesn't help you 16 years ago, but everything that all the mistakes that I made back then, the failures that I made back then, it's like, I'm not repeating that now. Right. And so I think that in life gives us the opportunity to succeed and fail. So we learn. And then we take those successes and we take those failures into every situation. And every year that goes by, we have more failures and we have more successes. We have more failures and more successes. And so what I do is like, okay, well, this didn't go right, but this, I know this, and this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lean into that because, you know, 38 years old, I have a lot of experience now that I didn't have, you know, 15 years ago. Right. And so, and I think that that's what's important. You know, I want to leave the interview on a happy note in the sense of like we're family. Right. And no
Yeah,
matter,
absolutely. No, family comes first. And that's very important. You know, you people come and go from your life, but there are certain people that, you know, even people that are not blood related, that are family. And family is the most important thing you can have, and through any situation, difficult situation you're going through, because you don't even necessarily they don't even necessarily have to know everything, but they'll be there for you, and that's the important thing about family. Yeah, it's necessary and it's important, and we give usually a lot of value to other things that don't deserve it as much as the people we love.
I love it. I love it. That's perfect. That's perfect. And that's how we're going to close this thing. Lau, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your truth with us, because it was an emotional roller coaster, and I thank you for sharing it.
No, thank you for having me, and I hope at the end, you know, the purpose of being here, I hope that maybe somebody that's going on that through certain situations like this will listen and say, well, you know, I mean, it's not the end of the world, and we'll all get through this.
And I'm worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks, we've now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida. Thank you.
All right, thanks.